Experience College and Career Academy, School Day 125, Tay Smitson's first day. Note: while the school, students, staff members, and events of ECA Academy are all fictional, they are an amalgam of real students, staff, and events. Tay's background is an amalgam of two students that I have had the privilege to teach in the last 20 years. I say this as there is a tendency to generalize when we consider specific groups of people, such as with certain races, ethnicities, or classes. We tend to only tell one story in one type of way. I will tell many stories. This just happens to be the first. Next time my story follows a student, I will feature a different student and a different background. For example, Benjamin lives next door to Tay with his loving mom and dad. He also attends ECA, and his assets and needs are very different. One thing I want to make clear: I will not and cannot glorify poverty. If Tay's mom, Tanya, had been given more financial support or could have afforded daycare as a single mom, Tay's life could have been improved markedly. If just working one job had paid Tanya enough money to thrive, Tay would have had a present and loving parent. Tanya worked 3 part-time jobs, was still on the brink of being homeless, and was perpetually exhausted. Poverty creates imperfect situations that we as a society have to confront and ponder. There is an emerging tendency to accept individual situations as finite and perpetual, to associate judgment of the situation as judgment of the person. This tendency commits the fundamental attribution error, and I will attempt not to do so in these stories. I also hope these stories can serve to assist as a starting point in conversations about these matters. I hope one thing comes across clearly: how much I cared about Tay. I still think about him or her and hope that his life situation has improved. And yes, I was the one that she called a fat you-know-what. When on her first day in science class, I called her by her first name. I had to channel every ounce of Martin Luther King agape energy to not snap back, and as a result, I became her favorite teacher and helped her through some tough times. Here's a brief glimpse into her story. Before school. Tay was what her friends called her. It was her name. She was not Tanya. Tanya was the name of her mama, and she would not share a name with her. The same woman who constantly made Tay feel inadequate, inferior, unloved. Of course, Tay and her mom barely said 2 words to each other since the move to Las Vegas. Tay was still a daddy's girl, even after what he had done to the family. Her dad had been stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. He moved Tay, her mom, and her 3 little sisters to Las Vegas, and then ended up leaving the family for a woman he met at a bar. This left her family with no money, and an apartment her mom could not afford without working all the time. Her mom now worked 3 part-time jobs, and Tay was left alone to take care of her baby sisters. Tay resented her mom for this. She was an 11-year-old mom, and not by choice. This situation persisted until March, when her mom announced suddenly that Tay would be going to school the next day. Tay didn't care for school. She had attended school on base before in a few different states, but she had a hard time being told what to do. At home, she was the boss of her sisters. She got to call the shots. The only adult in Tay's life saw her for a few moments each day when she got home from her night job. When her mom had the occasional day off, she was so tired she simply slept most of the day. Tay saw on television moms and dads that were involved and families that were close and happy. It's just so it wasn't real to her. Instead, she developed a deep-seated hatred for her mom. This hatred extended to most teachers when she went to school. What right did they have to tell her what to do, to treat her like a little kid? The adults in her life weren't worth respecting or listening to, so what made teachers think they were any different? Regardless, Tay was told that she either attended school or her mom would have to pay a fine. So in the morning, Tay shuffled her 3 yawning sisters to the elderly neighbor's apartment across the hall and boarded a bus for Experience Academy. Apparently, she had been randomly selected to attend the nearby district charter school as opposed to the zone school a few blocks over. Her mom didn't care what school she went to. She didn't have the time or energy to care. To Tay, a school was a school. So she donned her hood and clinched it tight, covering most of her face. She was hoping she could hide and listen to music through her earbuds, a gift of guilt from her dad. Ignoring the bus driver's welcome and the few students already on the bus, she quickly took a seat and stared out the window, lost in the lyrics of NBA Youngboy. Tay was directed by smiling but unimportant faces to the school's registration office. The registrar said a few words to her that Tay barely heard and then handed her a schedule. First period, Science 6, Miss Hawthorne, room 206. Second period, Math 6, Mr. Gutierrez, room 303. Third period, Technology 6, or Girls PE, Miss Hatchett, room 105. Fourth period, Student Skills SEL 6, Mr. Mackenzie, room 202. Fifth period, English 6, Miss Sullivan, room 401. Sixth period, Reading 6, Miss Borkin, room 406. And seventh period, Beginning Art 6, Miss Fujimoto, room 509. Club, Cooking Club, The Bistro, Mrs. Bacon, Mr. Glanville, room 505. Now, dear, today is a club day, and it looks like you are starting in, Cooking Club. Oh, now that is just wonderful. I'm going to have Yadira here take you to the annex and show you where your club is. The lady behind the desk turned and pointed at a tall-looking girl who stood up and approached Tay with a big smile on her face. Hi, Tay. Great to have you here at Eka. Follow me. Club time. The Bistro. Room 505. Mr. Glanville. B-Week. Tay hated meeting teachers because she always knew that she would be called Tanya. Nice to meet you. Great to have you in the Bistro, stated Mr. Glanville. My name is Tay, you fat fuck, she snapped back loudly, causing a few students around the room to glance over at her for a moment. Tay expected extreme anger from the teacher. She expected the few students around her to laugh. She expected to get kicked out. She didn't want to be at school, but no laughing was heard. The kids in the room were too busy doing something at the counters. As for the teacher, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. Instead, he lowered his voice and adopted a look of care that she had not seen in a while. Miss Tay, I apologize. That is actually a wonderful nickname. I'm going to make a note of it here on my chart so I don't make that mistake again. Hey, next time, let's follow norm number 1. He pointed to a list of norms on the wall. We try to treat everyone with respect here. I promise I won't call you names or be mean to you. Please try to do the same for me. Hey, we make mistakes. Let's do the best we can, all right? Not used to kindness from someone she had just yelled obscenities at, Tay could only lower her head and mutter, Fine. Miss Tay, you will be at Station 5. Please join your cooking team. Mr. Glanville directed Tay over to a group of students hovering around a small cooking station. It had a burner, pots, pans, and an assortment of cooking tools Tay recognized from home. At this point, Tay really started to pay attention to the absurdity of her day so far. She was at school, but instead of starting the day with reading, math, writing, all things she hated as she was not good at any of them, she was helping cook something called a chorizo salsa omelet. The 8th grade girl on her team that introduced herself as Layla explained that when following the recipes, they would each take turns with certain jobs. One would read the step, the next would explain the step while pointing at the tools and ingredients, the third would perform the step, and the fourth would coach, correct, and praise. They would then switch roles after a few minutes. Now, being a deputized mom at home, Tay found the time spent in the bistro quite enjoyable. She was already pretty good at cooking, and this gave her the time to get to know a few of the kids at the school. She even enjoyed Mr. Glanville as he would walk around the room, help the teams, and try to get to know everyone in the class. He spent extra time with her. He asked tons of questions about what she liked to cook at home and who she cooked for. There was no evidence that he even remembered the names that she had called him. The most peculiar thing that happened during this time was nearing the end when the omelets were made and put onto platters. The designated leaders left the room with the platters, and Mr. Glanville allowed Tay to follow along to see what was happening. The leaders walked back into the main building with their trays, walked through the hallways, and entered into room 108. This was a large room filled with many teachers sitting in groups around tables. They all appeared to be sifting through papers, chatting, and typing into their computers. Tay was used to seeing one teacher in a room. Here she counted 15. The smell wafted through the room, and Tay heard the delight in the teachers' voices as they thanked the bistro students who served the omelets to the teachers. Layla handed Tay a plate to serve and directed her to a nearby table. Now, who are you, miss? Interjected the elderly woman that Tay was serving. My name is Tay. I'm new. Well, it is certainly nice to meet you, Tay. I am Mrs. Bacon. I will run the bistro next week. Mr. Glanville and I take turns so I can meet with other teachers when he's running the club. Thank you so much for the omelet. Did you help make this one? Yeah, I worked on that one, she whispered. Mrs. Bacon took a big bite and a large grin spread across her face. Now, that is probably the best omelet I have ever tasted. My compliments to the chef. Tay stepped back, her eyes uncontrollably welled with tears, as she quickly whispered thank you and headed back towards the door. Memories of her grandma from long ago surfaced, memories that she had pushed away, back when kindness was a constant companion in her life. She realized that this might have been the first compliment she had received from an adult in months. The only words between her mom and her for quite some time were angry and bitter. She very much looked forward to seeing Mrs. Bacon at the next club time next week. She wished club time was every period every day. But hey, this was school. So very soon, the bell rang. Period 4, Student Skills. Mr. Mackenzie, Student Skills SEL, room 202. If cooking club was strange, student skills was downright crazy. Mr. Mackenzie had also called her Tanya, but this time she reacted differently. She calmly corrected Mr. Mackenzie, and he also made a note to call her Tay. She was in a good mood, and she remembered the way that she had been treated by Mr. Glanville. Room 202 was set up in an odd fashion. The tables were pushed to the side of the room, and the chairs were arranged into 8 teams of 4. The chairs in each team were labeled on the back, and Tay was asked to please sit in chair 31. Looking closer, she saw that each chair had a large label on the back with a purple seat number, a blue number 1 to 4, a green letter A or B. Tay happened to sit in position 3A, and the chair next to her was labeled 4B, and those facing her were labeled 1A and 2B. When Tay sat down, her 3 teammates introduced themselves right away. Hey, I'm Antonio. Rachel, nice to meet you. I'm Sarah, sup? Hi, Tay squeaked out. She was surprised that everyone was so ready to talk to her. At the last school she had been in, she was mostly ignored. So, what's your name? Stated Antonio. I'm Tay, she responded. Tay, good to meet you. Let me help you with your starter, okay? Tay watched as Antonio grabbed a whiteboard that was velcroed to his seat. He also grabbed a black sock and took out a marker from the sock. Tay did the same, and Antonio let her know that she needed to answer the question on the screen by filling in the blanks. At school, I get angry when blank. When I am angry, I blank. Tay knew just what to write. She wrote, At school, I get angry when teachers call me the wrong name. When I am angry, I call them bad names back. High five, said Mr. Mackenzie with an enthusiastic tone. Mr. Mackenzie seemed very young and was extremely charismatic. He smiled brightly when everyone had turned their bodies to face him. I walked around and I saw a lot of great answers. Let's go ahead and complete this first round with a round robin. You're going to read off what you wrote and then see if you can add one or more follow-on sentences with more information. If you finish early, see if you can do another filling in the sentence with another time you got angry. Let's celebrate before we move between partners with a good old thank you for sharing with their name. Number 4 is, we'll start. Ready, set, go. The whole class immediately roared with noise and energy as the 4 shared. Tay listened to Antonio, then Rachel, then Sarah. She then shared herself. At school, I get angry when teachers call me the wrong name. When I'm angry, I call them bad names back. I called a teacher a bad name last period, but it was strange. He didn't send me out of the classroom. Are teachers crazy here? Well, I guess so, responded Antonio. We spend a lot of time here learning to speak to each other. They really care how we treat each other, but also how they treat us. It's strange, but I like it here. I don't get called names like retard and gay anymore here. Every teacher, well, almost every teacher would stop that right away. It's just different here. At this point, Mr. Mackenzie used his high five again and flashed a bright smile. Great! Next, we're going to try to figure out positive ways to deal with our anger. You can see on the board what I wrote. A fake whiteboard popped up on the screen with the following words across them. At school, I get angry when students choose not to listen to me. When I am angry, I yell. Tay could not imagine this young man with the bright smile yelling. So let's see if we can come up with some ways I can deal with my anger in a way that gives others a way out with respect and dignity. The whole class immediately responded, A way out with respect and dignity. For example, continued the teacher, I could say their name, repeat what I said. I know sometimes I don't listen so well, so by repeating myself, this allows them a way to hear what they needed to hear. Let's do a pair share with our partners. What could you do when you get angry in your situations? Silent think time, please. The whole class went silent and stared straight ahead. The silence was a bit uncomfortable. Tay glanced around, and everybody really did seem deep in thought. Okay, A will speak first, and then B will speak. Ready, set, go. Well, I guess I could just correct them and let them know what my nickname is rather than getting mad, she stated more confidently than before. She loved that she had a chance to talk. A lot of times she would always stay silent in groups, but Mr. Mackenzie always seemed to make sure everyone got to share, that everyone felt important. That's a great answer. When I'm angry at my partners for not doing their work, I can help them with exactly what they need and help them get started, added Antonio. Mr. Mackenzie got the class's attention again with his high five. Okay, next I want you to get a unique answer from someone else in the class. We're going to do a stand-up, hand-up, pair-up, so let's stand up. The whole class stood up. Tay's nerves kicked in and she hesitated for a moment, but seeing the rest of the class up so quickly, she slowly rose to her seat. All right, hand up and pair up. Tay watched as the class found someone outside of their team quickly and paired up. The shortest girl in the class saw Tay from across the room with her hand up and quickly shuffled over to her. They both turned towards Mr. Mackenzie. All right, pair share. Let's do an alphabetical. The partner that will go first, is the alphabetical favorite food. "Hey, I'm Myrna," Myrna blurted out loudly. "I'm your new friend." Myrna laughed like this was the funniest joke in the world, and Tay couldn't help but laugh at the same time. "I'm sorry. Mr. Mackenzie makes us practice these corny lines. But honestly, I have so many more friends now. I used to be lonely, but this class helps me just be more myself and share with others. I used to be the quiet, shy girl. Now we practice talking to each other every day." "Well, you are my first friend here then," stated Tay. "Good. I'll see you at lunch then." Now the two had missed Mr. Mackenzie's instructions this time, but for some reason he had listened to the girls' chat and had ignored it. "Okay, real quick," said Myrna. "I got your problem solved, friend. Take your schedule, the one that the teacher sees. Just cross out your first name and write your nickname above it." Tay said nothing. She just stared at this tiny little thing as if she had just described the secrets of the universe. All at once, the pair burst out laughing. The rest of this period flew by for Tay. The rhythm of this class was unlike any other she had ever attended. She spent time writing answers on whiteboards, sharing with her partners, moving around the room. At one point, the students looked at survey results around anger and interpreted graphs and data tables. Students read article excerpts to each other concerning techniques of dealing with anger. Near the end, they even rehearsed an interaction in which one partner pretended to be an angry teacher, and the other tried to give the teacher a respectful way out with respect and dignity. 2 periods down, and it was like Tay had entered a brand new universe. And then the bell rang. Period 5, English, Miss Sullivan. English 6, room 401. Tay entered room 401 with her guard up. Tay was not great at writing, reading, math. She had rarely spent more than a few months at any school or in any classroom. Her insecurities emerged as misbehavior. She would rather be in trouble than show her teacher how horrible she was at writing. Miss Sullivan cheerfully greeted Tay. "So, I see here that your name is Tay. Nice to meet you, Tay." Tay couldn't stifle the chuckle that came up. Myrna had undoubtedly solved her problem. She was excited to share this with her during lunch. Tay sat next to a partner this time that was a bit reserved and quiet. However, something odd happened before Miss Sullivan began class. An older-looking girl pulled up a chair next to Tay and introduced herself. "Hi, Tay. I'm Taylor, an 8th grader. I'm one of Miss Sullivan's LAs, or learning assistants. Miss Sullivan has asked me to sight-sit with you this period." Tay didn't quite know what to say. She'd never had something like this happen before. Taylor was wearing a badge that indeed stated that she was Miss Sullivan's learning assistant, or LA. A second LA was also walking around the room helping other students with their writing. Miss Sullivan's lesson was just as different and just as interactive as the last. Taylor and Tay read an article together. When Tay struggled with the words, Taylor was right there for her. Taylor would stop and ask Tay questions to start a discussion about what was being read. Miss Sullivan then walked the pair through something called a rally write. Tay, Taylor, and her partner took turns adding sentences to a fictional story that used the information they learned in the nonfiction article. Every time they shared one thing they liked about the new sentence and suggested an improvement on the spot. Miss Sullivan walked around and provided similar feedback. The class flew by quickly with Taylor as a learning assistant. Tay had not felt stupid once. She had felt fully supported. Taylor was the best teacher in the classroom. And then the bell rang. Lunchtime. Myrna was true to her word and scooted up way too close to Tay. Myrna was just that kind of girl. She had no boundaries. Myrna's friend group joined them and introduced themselves. "So what's the deal with the learning assistants?" Tay questioned. "I know. They're so awesome," blurted Myrna. "It's new this year, I guess. Last year, Eka was just a normal school. My sister was an 8th grader here, and the schedule's new, the classes are new, the clubs are new, and teachers are just everywhere. I can't wait to be in LA for Miss Sullivan next year. She says she'll pick me if I work hard and keep my grades up." Everybody agreed that they wanted to be in LA one day. "So how do I become an LA then?" Tay asked. "I'm pretty sure you have to be picked by a teacher. I know they were trained in Mr. Mack's room. It was weird because I heard there were teachers and LAs in the room together. Mr. Mack trained them all together. He's a weird teacher. You'll see him. He dresses up all the time, but he mostly works with the teachers. You'll see him and the teachers in all different rooms. It's like in my last school, teachers didn't really like each other. I never saw them in each other's rooms." Tay nodded her head in agreement. "This year, they're in each other's rooms all the time. They also seem to talk to each other all the time. You learn something in math, and they talk about it in science or English." Tay had found some great friends, but they were also very different. At her last school, every little word out of their mouths was something vulgar, something inappropriate. When they talked about teachers, they insulted them and put them down. None of that seemed to happen here. These thoughts were in her head when the bell rang. Period 6, reading, Miss Borkin, reading 6, room 406. The joy of the day seemed to come to a crashing halt in Miss Borkin's room. Miss Borkin insisted on calling Tay by the officially recorded name. "Tanya, please sit in the front and stay there till I'm ready to place you in the room," stated Mrs. Borkin in an aggressive manner. Tay felt that ever-present anger start to well inside of her. She was getting ready to explode. It would be the same story with Miss Borkin, she could tell. She was going to call her names, the class would laugh, she would get kicked out, she was ready to blow. And suddenly, Miss Sullivan entered the room. Tay could not imagine blowing up in front of Miss Sullivan. Why was Miss Sullivan in the room with this horrible old lady? Tanya, I've selected your seat. You need to sit over here, stated Miss Borkin mechanically. Miss Sullivan walked over to Miss Borkin with a smile and whispered something in her ear. They had a brief conversation, and the look on Miss Borkin's face changed. Okay, Tay, please come sit in this seat, Miss Borkin repeated. Tay couldn't help but smile as she went to her new seat. Miss Sullivan had stood up for her and helped her in another teacher's classroom. The reading lesson wasn't really great, but occasionally Miss Sullivan would interject and re-explain things or give the directions in a more coherent way. Miss Sullivan also went over to the L.A., who was hiding in a corner, and directed the L.A. to sit next to Tay. His name was Gerardo, and he wasn't quite as wonderful as Taylor was in Miss Sullivan's class. But several times Miss Sullivan would provide feedback to Gerardo to help him become a better L.A. There was a partnership here between the two teachers that Tay had never seen before. Miss Sullivan had saved the day for Tay. And then the bell rang. Period 7, Art. Miss Fujimoto, room 406. Miss Fujimoto's room was absolutely beautiful. Murals and artwork lined the walls. Clay sculptures were placed on all the counters around the art room. At Tay's last school, she wasn't allowed to go to art or music or any expressive class. She was sent to the stupid kid room, instead where the teachers hit her over the head with extra math and reading. Tay was able to express herself, her anger, and Miss Fujimoto helped her do this through her drawing and paintings. Best of all, Myrna was in the same class as her, so they could work together. It was a lovely way to end the day. Tay felt like a different person from the one that had boarded the bus 7 hours earlier. She looked forward to going to school the next day. In one day, she had teachers that she liked and some new friends. And then the bell rang. After school commentary. All right, on club time. I was really wary of club time. We knew with a 7-period day there would be a block of time that was unused, and we needed something special to take up that time. So the idea of club time was suggested by an administrator. And at the time, I was very much into doing everything I could to create teaming time between teachers. And so I came up with the idea of a shared club time. This way we could have some great cross-curricular teaming every other week. So 6th grade and half of 8th teamed one week, and then 7th grade and half of 8th teamed the next week. And it was just some extra bonus time to plan. At first, teachers were concerned that club time would be an extra prep. And so my requirement was that the club they chose should require very little extra work. For example, board games are wonderful as they foster communication and cooperation, and they really require a little extra work. The strong majority of teachers and students actually love club time. In fact, I started to love club time after a few months myself. I love that a lot of students like Tay, who had to go home right after school to take care of her sisters, were able to be a part of club during the school day. Some teachers also put a lot of time into clubs. For example, one of my favorite teachers of all time, Ms. Shao, put tons of time and effort into the bistro. So this was a real thing. Kids loved cooking food, and Ms. Shao received a lot of donations and set up fully working kitchen stations in her room. And it was even more special when she had the great idea to serve food every week to the teachers that were teaming. So yeah, all of this part of the story was 100% true. On being called names. Look, I know the gut response of many should be to immediately punish a student for being so vulgar and horrible. I don't always get called names like that. And there's several reasons that I no longer choose to punish students that are verbally angry with myself as a teacher. Because, I've essentially heard it all in 20 years. There's very few names I've not been called at this point. The world is filled with profanity for many of our students, and when students are angry, their amygdala turns off, their frontal cortex. So they react instinctively and without thought. That being said, how I react to this response will determine if the situation escalates or not. With calm body language and tone, I can often calm down a student. Through discussion and establishment of a relationship, the student will often regret what they've said. They just have to realize I'm not a villain. And keep in mind that I view this moment as teachable. The students I teach are 11, 12, 13 years old. They are learning to control their emotions, and by not making a big deal out of this and utilizing my norms like I did, I am addressing the situation. And this is actually why students don't often react in my classroom. They know that I personally will not react, and they also know that if they laugh or if they react, that's the students that I have the longest talks with. Now, you may be thinking that the student belongs in the dean or SSO office, or they will not learn a lesson. But you see, this is my classroom. This is my space. I'm the one that determines what happens in my room through my actions or inactions. Adding a third person into that element complicates the situation, and to be honest, never seems to solve the issue. At best, the student's suspended, and it delays any resolution. So if you believe that the role of discipline is to constantly remove those that have the worst behaviors from their chance at an education, I question the utility of your methods. There is one caveat to this. If a student threatens myself or another student, and I feel that there is malice behind this threat, this is a totally different story. In my mind, administration must intervene when a student feels that they can make other students or staff feel unsafe at school. The mindset of teaching students how to behave is wonderful, but there are absolute limits in today's day and age. If Tay had threatened to kick my ass with a believably angry look on her face, I would have had a very different reaction. But you see, these decisions are just not easy. On mentoring students through a student skills class. I love the idea of a student skills class. Many administrators also like this idea, but they instead create these homerooms or special periods that all teachers have to do. And I've taught in homerooms, and I've observed many homerooms or special mentorship periods. I can 100% claim that this is a mistake. This is for one very important reason. Not all teachers can mentor and inspire students. Note that in the story, the student skills teacher, Mr. McKenzie, was chosen for a reason. He's an outstanding educator, and the students relate to him. His original teaching assignment was as a social studies teacher, but kids simply seem to love him. This way, students are mentored by a teacher that can truly mentor them. On teaching methods. The methods that Mr. McKenzie uses are directly from 3 Higher Whiteboarding by Jeffrey McAlpine, myself, and Cooperative Learning by Spencer Kagan. Not every teacher is ready to facilitate methods like these, but it is essential that a school attempts to do so. When teachers use 3% methods, and those are methods where only one person talks at a time, the rest of the students stay silent. Now, the intention when someone raises their hand and shares is for students to listen and think about what's been said. But many students don't do this. However, there's no way for the teacher to know. So I call this invisible misbehavior. When one shares, the majority of the class could be misbehaving and not listening. However, when students write on a whiteboard in a specific pattern from 3 Higher Whiteboarding, or they have equal time and turns to share, the misbehavior is visible. A student choosing not to share then can be seen. And the problem with this is that many teachers that have only ever used 3% strategies like cold calling or raised hand then think that these methods are causing the misbehavior. And this is just not true. In fact, these methods, in which all have to participate, are making the invisible misbehavior visible. Years ago, when I started inventing 3 Higher Whiteboarding methods, I just let go of raised hand altogether. And as a result, the learning in my room skyrocketed. On learning assistants. Originally, these students were called buddies. However, I didn't like the name at the time as it really didn't do justice to what they needed to do in classrooms. Like club time, I was hesitant to implement the idea of learning assistants. We knew that we needed an extra elective class offering, but did not have the funds for this. So without an extra elective every single period, the class sizes of elective classes would be through the roof. With this, I came up with the idea of buddies. Many PLC schools had used mentor students, but it was really on a small scale. The first year of buddies, I had from 35 to 40 of the top 6th and 7th graders every period. I knew that only I could train them. I knew what students were capable of when it came to helping others and tutoring. The strategies I used in the classroom capitalized on this. Thus, the 2 main roles of buddies were tutors and side-sitters. I had this idea that if we were just to remove or take off the plate from the teacher the most difficult students in the class, that life would be much easier and the teacher could focus more on overall instruction. So side-sitting was a genius stroke. We gave each buddy a chair and told the teacher to park them where they could help with one student. In reality, what we had done was to increase most teachers' class sizes by 2 or 3. We essentially said, yeah, you're going to have some extra students, but they're going to be your best students. You're going to pick them, and their only job is to make your life easier. For 2 weeks, I trained buddies in a model classroom. So each stack team came into the room and also sat in a seating chart. Thus, in 2 weeks, I trained close to 300 student mentors to be buddies. I trained every teacher in the building to use the buddies, and I demonstrated my teaching methods to the entire staff while they participated in the lesson. At the end of the 2 weeks, buddies were placed in classrooms, and my day opened up to work with stack and PLC teams. Thus, we had created what I dubbed the destructible classroom. In addition, once a month, I would tell the teachers to send the buddies back to the training room and would demonstrate more techniques for the teachers while further training the buddies. This program was absolutely worth its weight in gold, but it was so unique that I have a hard time explaining it to someone, so they'll want to try it again. An entire position could be created just for a buddy teacher, regardless of stack time or PLC time. Look at how having a buddy helped Tay adjust to her new school. This wasn't unusual. This type of buddy-student interaction became the norm. A teacher friend of mine said it better than I could when asked about buddies. He said, this year, more than anything, it seems we've legitimized the smart kids. Everybody wants to be a buddy, and this really isn't an exaggeration. On stack time mentorship. When I originally wrote the book called Stacking the Deck, I listed a whole lot of ideas for what stack time could be used for. However, my goal was that the teacher stack teams would brainstorm and decide on what was done each week. Using this time for class time mentorship was very popular amongst teacher teams. Keep in mind, when we started the first year, we kind of tiptoed into this. We created a code of conduct. We analyzed and discussed possible negative events that could occur. We had a system for discussion when teachers felt slighted by visitors to their classroom. However, I eventually found this to be overkill. There really was very little conflict when teachers went into rooms to help each other. We just had to have the dialogue ahead of time concerning what everyone was comfortable with. There were many interactions in the first 3 years, like what occurred between Miss Sullivan and Miss Borkin. Miss Borkin, while seemingly closed off, would express that she wanted help learning to better accept students for who they were. She just didn't really know how to do this. So it took time to establish friendship and trust between Miss Sullivan and Miss Borkin. Note that this is day 125 in the story of the school's first year of STACK. A final note. It was fun to peel back the onion of a 4-year experience I had years ago. It may be hard to convince the reader that these events happened. Trying to describe these experiences through the mind of a 6th grader, as well as interjecting my own voice, has been difficult. Ultimately, this is the first of many stories, and I hope to improve my writing as this year continues. I'm certain I'll go back and add more to the story. I hope you enjoyed reading and listening to this, and I really do thank you sincerely for your time. Now go change the world.